browser just started to grow back, and obviously my head. I told you guys I had bald spots all over the place. I got tired of trying to manage it. Mr. Clean on the next thing. You look like you're doing football right there in South Florida. We appreciate you doing this as we build up the basketball, and please come back on once the season gets rolling. Absolutely, guys. I appreciate what you guys do covering our league and covering our sport. Look forward to hopefully giving you guys some great things to talk about this year. Yes, sir. Thank you, Coach. We love your perspective. I appreciate you, Coach. Thank you, guys. Speaking of the building up the basketball, Big Blue Madness on the road. Game of the whole year.
Bitcoin now up roughly 146% year to date. It's gained nearly 70% this quarter. Let's bring in Catherine Coley. She's the CEO of Binance. And Catherine, let's start with the moves that we have been seeing here. I mean, what's been driving the gains?
Thanks so much. It's really been amazing to see this rally driven largely by spot buyers. You're seeing the funding premiums of the perpetual futures still actually be relatively low, stuck in that kind of range where they were at 12,000. So this acceleration of price has been largely led by the real gains in validation that we're seeing that we didn't see in 2017. So for the first time ever, you're seeing congressmen and women understand Bitcoin. You're seeing macro investors understanding Bitcoin. You're even seeing corporate treasuries understanding and adding Bitcoin to their balance sheets.
And Catherine, we've seen a few other commodity traders, big names in the commodity space. You can look at Paul Tudor Jones coming on board as well. But one of those early adopters, Mike Novogratz, was on CNBC earlier talking about a price target of $50,000 to $60,000 per Bitcoin by next year. Kind of stretching into that idea that you can capture about 10% of the gold market. That's where the price comes from. But talk to me about how the enthusiasm right now, compared to what you saw back in 2017, could maybe make that a reality, considering, I guess, this new breakout we're seeing play out now.
Very much so. This industry is in constant motion. So what we've seen in the last week isn't us sitting on our laurels, but still building. You've seen Novogratz have an amazing week of announcements. You've seen PayPal come into the U.S. retail market. Binance US has launched our connection with Silvergate Exchange Network, allowing institutional traders to come through. And we're even launching a new app coming out in the near future. So the best part about this industry is we're still evolving, still building, regardless of the price.
Certainly a lot of new investors looking to get in. And I'm curious how you think they should be looking at this. There's been so much debate about whether it is considered a safe haven asset, whether it is a hedge, whether it should be traded in tandem with gold. I mean, what have you seen shift around the trades in this most recent surge that we've seen?
We've definitely seen the infrastructure mature since the last year or so. And in that, you've seen different ways of people being able to come into trading. So dollar cost averaging has actually been quite popular and quite successful for many investors in this past year, knowing that what lies ahead is definitely a digital future, accelerated by the pandemic for sure. And what they're going into is not necessarily timing their entries and exits with expectations, but just growing their position over time. So having dollar cost averaging integrated into these exchanges, as well as seeing just the maturity of the products available. Grayscale is at an all-time high in terms of the Bitcoin they hold under custody. And as you just see, this access is becoming more and more available for everyone.
Yeah, Catherine, as one of the CEOs of the largest exchanges here in the U.S., I mean, talk to me about regulatory changes, because we saw the chairman of the SEC is going to be stepping down. That's news. Each time I see Bitcoin back up at these highs, it gives me a little anxiety just kind of watching the way things have changed over regulatory updates. What kind of clarity have we gotten over the last couple of years on that front, though, and how much is still remaining to be seen? What changes could come through when we get a new chairman of the SEC?
You've seen a tremendous amount of collaboration in the US, specifically with the industry players, to make sure that we are not falling behind as a country involved in digital assets. So the great work of the Blockchain Association, getting involved with other groups that are really...
A business empire needs decisive leadership, but also a steady hand. For over 40 years, Charlie Munger has been the ladder for Berkshire Hathaway. As Berkshire's vice chairman, the 95-year-old Munger is Warren Buffett's right-hand man. He's also an investing legend in his own right. Munger ran a firm in the 1960s and 70s that scored returns of over 24% per year. He's here to talk about how to make investment decisions and life choices that help secure prosperity and longevity. I'm Andy Serwer. Welcome to Influencers, and welcome to our guest, Vice Chairman of Berkshire Hathaway, Charlie Munger. Charlie, nice to see you.
Delighted to be here.
So you just had the annual meeting, and I have to ask you what your favorite moments of that were.
What I like is that both the shareholders and the employees of Berkshire are so extremely enthusiastic. And it's not just that they've made a lot of money and have nice careers. They think they're on the right side.
And, you know, they come there to hear you guys talk all day. And
Yes, like a cult.
it's like a cult?
Yeah.
In a good way, though.
In a good cult. Yes, a good cult.
Okay. I mean, in the stuff that they hear, some of it's new, some of it's old, and a lot of it is common sense. And you were talking a
All
lot
of
about
it is common sense.
Right.
But of course, when people use the word common sense, what they mean is uncommon sense. Because the standard human condition is ignorance and stupidity. And so when they say old Joe has common sense, what they mean is he has uncommon sense.
I guess it's a bit of a misnomer then. But
It really is.
so, yeah, why is it that people can't think clearly about investing or decisions in their lives?
Well, they don't think very well about sex or gambling either. You know, the standard human condition is a lot of miscognition.
And there are ways to make hay of that, or
Yes, you can take advantage of other people. You can improve your own life by eliminating your miscognitions.
Let me shift gears a little bit, Charlie, and ask you about the U.S. economy. And what is your take on where things are right now?
Well, obviously they're booming, but you know, the economy sometimes booms and sometimes it doesn't. And you have to live your life through both episodes. And our attitude is we just keep swimming, and sometimes the tide is with us and sometimes against. But we keep swimming either way.
Are you surprised by how long this expansion has lasted?
Of course, it's lasted a long time. But what was really remarkable is that we never printed money so much and spent it so fast and bought back so much debt, public and private. So this is total terra incognita in economics. And nobody knew for sure how it was going to work.
So is it risky then?
Of course it was risky, but it worked. And I don't think they had much else that would work. They weren't set up to do stimulus. Too much controversy, democratic inertias, the various guys. So they had to do something, and all they had left was just to print money and start buying things. And that's what they did. And it turned out to be a very wise response. And what's even more remarkable is that both Congress and the presidency and under both parties made the same decision. They all cooperated. It was the last time.
But where is that going to leave us ultimately?
Well, it left us licking the Great Recession, so maybe we ought to try cooperation again since it worked so well once.
How much is President Trump responsible for this current economic situation?
Well, I think he deserves some credit, but a lot of it just happened.
Economic cycle?
Yeah. And the decisions of his predecessors.
What do you think about the president's campaign to lobby the Fed to lower rates or keep rates low?
Well, I think presidents have always done this. If you're a politician in a democracy, of course, you want people to print money and spend it. And, of course, it's not a good idea. The best example, probably in the whole world, is Singapore, which has zero debt and never prints money and spends it, and is one of the most successful places on earth. I wish we were like that, but there's only one Singapore.
Well, some people now say that federal debt is not a problem at all.
Well, if you believe that, you believe in the tooth fairy, because then we don't have to have any more taxes ever. We'll just print money and live happily ever after. It obviously won't work.
So
There comes a point when printing money is counterproductive.
are we at that point? Are you concerned?
No, I don't think we are at that point, but nobody knew where the point was going to come, and we don't know now. None of these people who are so pompously sure of things, because we all want reassurance, and so they provide it. But nobody really knows how much of this is too much.
And do you have any thoughts on Jay Powell and the job that he's done?
Well, I think a lot of him. I think he's as good a choice as we could have made.
One consequence of this expansion, or actually it precedes that, it's just something that's occurred in our economy over the past 50 years really, has been wealth and income inequality.
Yeah.
One, do you see it as a problem? Two, if so, how do we address it?
Well, it's a problem if enough politicians are screaming about it. That makes it a problem. If it weren't for that, this one will go away by itself. It happened by accident. We were in desperate trouble. We were on the eve of a Great Recession that could have been a Great Depression, and then followed by the rise of people like Adolf Hitler and so on and so on. So we faced a real catastrophe. The only weapon they had with this huge was to print money and spend it. And they did it. Well, of course, and they drove interest rates down to zero, or real interest rates. Well, of course, that lifted asset values for the people who were already rich. Nobody was trying to make the rich richer. It just was an accidental byproduct of a correct governmental decision made on a bipartisan basis. And since it was a weird byproduct that occurred in a weird time, it will go away by itself in due course.
It'll go away by itself, you think?
Sure.
So there's no reason for...
The people that are screaming about it are idiots. It's going to go away by itself. Now, that's not to say that we can't raise the minimum wage a little and enlarge the social safety net a little. We should be doing that as we prosper. Both parties agree on that.
What do you think about the proposals put forth by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Elizabeth Warren that would sort of greatly address this problem?
Well, I don't consider those two necessarily the best prescribers in the world. They're kind of likable. I particularly kind of like Elizabeth Warren. She's got a manner that appeals to me.
Really?
But I don't agree with her attitude. I don't think she's studied Adam Smith enough.
And what about AOC? Do you have any take on her?
I don't think she knows who Adam Smith was.
I want to ask you just a few more questions about politics, and we can talk about the markets and Berkshire a little bit more. What about the situation that we find ourselves in with the Mueller report and the way Congress and the Democrats are fixating on that and the president's on the defensive? What is your thinking on that?
I tend to avoid the whole subject, just as I ignore tide with me, tide against, and just keep swimming. Both parties are so partisan now that they're blinded by their anger, and I don't want to be blinded by my anger, so I control it, and I would recommend it to both parties. I think they should all cool it.
Why are we so divided up, Charlie, right now in this country?
Well, anger, when you pound on one another, feeds on itself. That's one of the great difficulties with it. It's irrational and it feeds on itself. So I liked the world when it was Dwight Eisenhower against Adlai Stevenson, and more civility, and Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill got along, and a lot of it was done. My war was a bipartisan war, and in the aftermath, foreign policy of the United States was a bipartisan policy. I like that world better. I hate this extreme hatred on both sides.
Will we ever get back to those days or get to new days where we don't have the hatred?
Probably. If you live long enough, a lot of good things happen and a lot of bad things happen.
Fair enough. It's my understanding, Charlie, that you were instrumental in helping Warren get away from focusing on the cigar butt form of investing and looked more towards companies that I guess you could call them branded companies.
Better businesses.
Better businesses, right?
Yes.
How did you help him make that decision?
Well, it was perfectly obvious, and he'd made so much money in the other technique that it was hard for him to leave something that had worked so well. But it was not going to scale. So when he started looking for investment values in great businesses that were temporarily under pressure, it changed everything for the better. Now we could scale up to the big time.
Are Apple and Amazon technology companies, or are they brand companies?
Both.
Someone told me they asked Warren if he could buy one brand, this was about 40 years ago, what that company, what that brand would be, and he said Gillette, which makes sense. What would that company be today?
Coca-Cola.
Still?
If you take the amount of Coca-Cola drunk in the world in the main flavor, it's one hell of a brand. Now, it's such a different product from this stuff on the internet. I don't have the same. My judgment would not be as good on the internet as it is on Coca-Cola.
I want to get back to Apple. Tim Cook was at the meeting yesterday.
He was indeed.
Did you get a chance to speak with him?
I did.
Can you tell us what you guys talked about?
Nothing. We exchanged pleasantries. But he's a wonderful guy, and of course it's a huge record that he's building.
Let me ask you a little bit about Kraft Heinz and that situation. During the meeting yesterday, we found out that the chief marketing officer was leaving the company. Did you know that, and what does that mean for the company?
I knew nothing about it in advance. What happened there was very easy. The truth of the matter is that Heinz Ketchup is a stronger brand than Kraft cheese, and they paid more for it. So one acquisition worked brilliantly and the other worked poorly. Well, welcome to adult life. It happens to everybody.
You mentioned that you think that Tim Sloan could still be or should still be the CEO of Wells Fargo?
Yeah, if I were running the world, Tim Sloan would still be the CEO of Wells Fargo.
Well, why did he leave then?
Well, he made this decision, but he was being pushed hard. He did it for the benefit of the company. There was just so much of this partisan hatred was washing off against Wells Fargo. It's understandable. He was there for a long time. The company had defrauded its own customers. Nobody was seemingly being punished for it in some people's minds. Listen, 2 CEOs left under pressure. I regard that as a lot of punishment. So I don't think these people were failing with their anger. They removed 2 CEOs, and so, but now they went out. It's like Tim Sloan was not responsible for the crazy incentive system that created the trouble. So they threw him out the way you'd take out the charwoman when you raid a gambling establishment.
Getting back to Coca-Cola, you mentioned that it would be a bad idea if it got into cannabis. I mean, why not? Doesn't it make sense?
Because it's such a wholesome brand and associated with happiness. Why do we want to associate it with a recreational drug?
Well, just,
No,
they have to grow.
I think that would be a terrible idea.
What about Boeing and the 737 MAX? I mean, they're going to fix that. Would you
Of course
go on
they're
the
gonna
plane?
fix it.
Would you go on the plane after they said it was fixed?
Yes, of course. And they will fix it well. But I don't think it was really all that excusable that they made the mistake.
I want to ask you, Charlie, a little bit about,
That was a serious mistake.
you know, saying they're still working on it.
Yeah, they'll fix it. Boeing probably has the best safety record in the world if you take 60 years. And this was a very unusual lapse. There may not be another one for 60 years.
Is that lapse symptomatic, though, or indicative of us developing software that's too powerful and we don't understand the consequences of it?
No, I don't think the problem was that. I think it was just an absolute lapse of being a big bureaucracy.
You also mentioned at the meeting yesterday doing billion-dollar deals overnight with very short contracts.
Yeah, we've always done that.
Has that ever blown up on you?
I can't think of a single example in my whole life where keeping it simple has worked against us. We've made mistakes, but they weren't because we kept it simple.
And that's simple.
I would say that the chief advantage that Berkshire has had in accumulating a good record is that we have avoided the pompous bureaucratic systems. We've tried to give power to very talented people and let them make very quick decisions.
I want to ask you about something that's talked about all the time with you guys, which is succession. And you talk about that all the time, and this has been countless barrels of ink spilled. But if you're getting older, how do you make the decision to step back if you may not have the mental acuity to make that decision?
Well, I think you'll be surprised at how well both Warren and I are capable of stepping back when we feel our powers are too far deteriorated.
Have you talked about that?
Sure. And Warren has told people to speak up when the time comes. If we've been rational all this way, do you think we're not going to try and be rational right to the bitter end?
Is the process, I mean, we're sort of in the middle of the process. You've been giving more and more control or authority to Ajit and Greg and Todd and Ted. So it's sort of a continuum, a process like that?
Of course. And by the way, it's working fine. It's amazing how good this next generation is. And they're steeped in our non-bureaucratic ways. There's these big bureaucracies, they think the work is done if you get it out of your inbox and into somebody else's inbox. That is not getting it done. Getting it done is when it's done, not when it's in somebody else's inbox. And if everybody's in a big committee meeting all the time, you're worn out at the end of the day and you haven't done anything.
Are Ted and Todd making all the stock choices at this point?
No, of course not. Warren steps in and does big things.
Where do you think, Charlie, the biggest opportunities are globally right now?
Well, I don't think we have a master plan of knowing where the opportunities are. We're trying to find intelligent things to do with a torrent of surplus cash. And we've always had a torrent of surplus cash. And we're always looking for intelligent things to do with it. And if we find things that are intelligent to do, we do it. And if we don't find anything, we let the cash build up. What the hell is wrong with that?
Not much.
Yeah, not much is right.
So I know that you guys have talked about England, or it seems that you have, because Warren talked about doing this article in the FT as basically a way of signaling potential interest, given that Brexit may create some opportunities. Is that the case?
What the hell do I know about Brexit? I don't even know how I'd vote on it if I were in England. Yeah, I don't know much about it. But we'll react to opportunities wherever they are, and we regard the vicissitudes of politics as it's just what they are, vicissitudes.
But isn't it a little bit more than a vicissitude to drop out of the European Union? I mean, is the
I'm
European
not suggesting it isn't a good deal. This country was enormously helped when we put all the colonies together. If we had internal tariffs against each little colony, the United States would not be as big as it is. So it's understandable why Europe wanted to get together. And in addition to the advantages they got from the free trade, they'd had a long history of having wars. And we all are in sort of one big place trading with one another. It'll be safer. Those were very good ideas. I'm not quarreling with the basic ideas. On the other hand, if you have unlimited immigration from one country to another, that causes lots of strains. Look at Germany. Merkel brought in more immigration than her people she wanted. She was leading a parade and she looked back and nobody was following. So these very few people want unlimited immigration of a different culture. We made it work in America, but we had a vacant continent to work on. It was easy. Vacant and rich, oil, minerals, wonderful soil.
Should we still be letting immigrants into this country?
I think we should have way more control over our borders than we do.
Isn't that
John
different
Trump
from-
is right on that, and I think the Democrats are committing suicide by being so. They hate him so much that they're against him even when he's right.
It seems like the borders is conflated with immigration policy sometimes, though, right? I mean, in other
Well, of
words,
course they are.
yeah.
But I think we ought to have some control over immigration, some effective control. I think the bulk of the people want to be very nice to the people that are already here, including all the people from Latin America, but they want more control over the inflows.
Are you concerned about this rise of somewhat nationalistic leadership around the world, like in Turkey, in Brazil, in China, in the United States, arguably?
Well, take Brazil. Who in the hell would like Brazil? It's a great climate and a great country, but they're screwing it up to a fairly well.
You mean the new leader, or just what's happened previously?
What's happened generally.
Yeah. Okay. So does that require a strong man to take over, though?
Well, I don't think I've got deep knowledge on exactly what works well in the internal politics of every other country. Who would have guessed that the Chinese communists would improve their big country as much as they have in the last 30 years?
That surprised you?
Well, they didn't. The first 20 years, they had the Cultural Revolution. It was crazy. And now they have one of the greatest success records in the history of mankind. I don't know about you, but I did not predict it.
I didn't. But what? So what is the secret to China's success then?
They copied Singapore.
Which
You
is
remember the communist leader said, "I don't care if the cat is black or white. I care whether it catches mice." And they copied a very wonderful, famous Chinese man in Singapore, and lo and behold, they found the right Chinese leadership outside of China, which amuses me. Now, he was Chinese, but look at the way it worked. In the whole history of the world, no nation that big has ever advanced that fast. And they did it by having a bunch of poor people save half their income. They did not use the wealth of the rich world to get ahead. They used the savings of poor people. I am a huge admirer of what the Chinese have accomplished. And if you ask me who is the one man who did the most for China, it was Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore. They copied him.
Are you still sanguine about the future for China right now? There's a lot of concerns about slowing growth and leverage in the system.
I'm quite optimistic. They've been succeeding for a long time. Sure, they have ups and downs, and they make mistakes as well as good decisions. But if you average them out, the Chinese are getting ahead. They're not moving backward.
What do you think the economic relationship between China and the United States looks like, say, 2 years from now?
Well, if both sides have any sense, they will be better and better friends and adjust all differences. It is stark raving madness on either side not to make a friend of the other really powerful nation on earth.
I want to ask you a little bit about some Silicon Valley stuff. I mean, you said yesterday you were ashamed of missing on Google.
Yeah, I am. We could see, if we looked carefully at our own companies, that their advertising was working way better than other advertising. Just we weren't paying enough attention.
So is it too late?
I don't know. I don't know everything, you know.
Well, we'll leave that aside. But, you know, you look at these tech investments. So there's Apple, now Amazon. Did you know about the Amazon purchase? Were you involved in that decision?
No, of course not. I've never owned a share of Amazon. I am a huge admirer of Bezos. I think he's been sort of like Lee Kuan Yew. He's a leader that's all by himself. He's been just a perfectly amazing human leader. But it's always been too complicated and uncertain for my particular temperament.
It's interesting.
And I find other things to do that work fine.
Someone was telling me the other day that they thought that you could actually sort of think of Apple and Amazon not as technology companies so much, but as big branded growth businesses, which would be something that would be appealing to you.
Well, I think they're both
Right.
brands and technologies. And it's hard to separate the effect of one from the other.
Okay. And as far as what's going on in Silicon Valley right now with IPOs, unicorns going public and not having any profitability or any prospect of profitability in the near term, what do you think of that situation?
Well, there are a whole lot of things I don't think about. And one of them is companies that are losing $2 or $3 billion a year and going public. It's not my scene.
Have you looked, so you're not interested in Uber or companies like that necessarily?
Well, I have to be interested when they're that important and sweep the world and change practice. But I don't have to invest in everything I'm interested in. I'm looking for things where I think I can predict what's going to happen with a high degree of accuracy. And I have no feeling that I have the ability to do that with Uber.
Right. I want to ask you about architecture, which is something you've been interested in for a while. How did you get interested in that, and what is your current
well, I had an uncle
situation
who
there?
was an architect, and I've always thought it was the queen of the arts. In other words, I think architecture does more good than painting or sculpture. So I think architecture is hugely important, very interesting, and does such enormous good when it's done right. So I'm a big admirer of the potentiality of the profession. But I think a lot of people go into architecture because they're sort of frustrated sculptors, and they don't think with enough common sense or uncommon sense about what the hell they're doing.
What are some projects that you've been involved with, though?
Oh, I've built houses, I've built office buildings, I've built apartment houses. I've helped charities and educational institutions build things. I built science centers. I do a lot of it. I like it.
Is this a creative outlet for you?
Yes, absolutely.
Do you have some projects that you're working on right now, some
Of
architecture
course.
projects? What are they about?
Well, I'm working on projects at UCSB, University of California at Santa Barbara, and it's basically housing, but of several kinds.
I want to shift gears and ask you a little bit about repurchasing shares. You said in the shareholder meeting, I predict we'll get a little more liberal in repurchasing shares. How much more aggressive will you get? And do you think that's going to be a problem potentially with the Democrats?
Well, a politician that's in the business of howling about something, trying to create a sense of outrage, they're always complaining about something. And it is true that a lot of people, it got so popular to purchase shares that some people repurchased them even when they were too high priced. We will never do that. We're only going to buy them back if they're too cheap. But of course that ought to be done. If you had a partnership of 3 of your crippled relatives and one of them needed some money, wouldn't you buy out the crippled relative with the company's money? It's just simple morality. But I do think it's being overdone by some people, and it undoubtedly is being done to prop up values, which I regard as an improper use of the share repurchasing technique.
Should there be laws about that?
No. There are laws, but we shouldn't be telling people what the right price is.
Right. So I want to ask you a little bit about the social safety net we were talking about and Medicare. And do you support Medicare for all? Would that be something you'd be interested in?
Well, I'm one of the few Republicans you'll ever talk to that thinks we should have a single-payer system, but not one of the type that we're going to get. If you look at the single-payer system of Singapore, it costs 20% of what ours cost, and that's an advanced, civilized, high-income nation. And, of course, the people are a lot healthier. Well, of course, I'd rather spend 80% less and have the people healthier. And, of course, I'd like to have American manufacturers not have this terrible burden of unnecessary health costs that affects their competitiveness in the world. So we have an insane medical system that grew like Topsy by accident with the help of a lot of dumb governmental intervention. Not all of it was dumb, but some of it was. And the system is ridiculous. If a young family has to pay a $5,000 deductible to have a baby, they don't really have medical insurance. It isn't just the Medicare that's wrong. The whole damn system is going wrong. And the amount of unnecessary tests and unnecessary prolongation of inevitable death that's going on is a national disgrace. Of course I don't like it.
Have you ever thought about moving to Singapore, Charlie?
Well, no, but I'd like to move some of Singapore's results into the United States. They have practically no deaths from opioids. They have a low crime rate. They have no debt of the whole country. No, they're doing a lot right. I wish to hell our politicians in both parties would spend a lot more time studying Singapore.
But some people say, many people say it's an authoritarian government. There's a lack of freedom there.
It's a democracy. It just does such a good job that the people keep reelecting it. I like that result. What the hell's wrong with that?
I was with some people just a few minutes ago, actually, and they were kind of recounting some of your zingers. Do you spend time before the meeting, say, oh, I've got like these 6 zingers I'm going to get out during the annual meeting?
Never. Think of all the people you know that have tried to take one extra step and have fallen off a cliff.
Well, on that happy note, we will conclude the meeting.
That's just come to you?
Yes, I think the meetings work better if they're spontaneous. If we were scripting things, I don't think people would like it.
So you and Warren don't say anything at all before you sit down there?
Zero.
You have no idea what's going to happen?
That is correct.
That's fantastic. So I want to ask you just a question or two about growing up. And you were at the University of Michigan, and you dropped out and joined the Army, right?
I certainly did.
And
We all did in those days.
yeah, so how did the Army influence you?
Well, everything influences you in your past life. And yes, of course, it influenced me. I never wanted to be in a big bureaucracy. I was well toward the bottom. I finally got to be a second lieutenant in the Army. I was way down in the ranks, and nobody gave a damn what I thought about any subject. They just gave me a little job to do, and I was supposed to do it. And of course, I didn't like that as well as having a freer rein to control my own destiny and so on. So I am much better adapted to being a capitalist operator than I am to being a cog in a bureaucracy.
Did you ever get in trouble in the Army?
Of course.
Tell us about that.
Well, my senior officers could tell I thought they were wrong. And I tried to hide it, and they could still tell. And so, of course, I never got in any
What did they
serious
say?
trouble, but who in the hell likes a junior officer? You look over there, and he's plainly indicating he thinks you're an idiot.
So that didn't work out too well.
Well, it worked out all right. I did my work well enough so they didn't bother me. But it was not a milieu where I was going to succeed.
Right. So how did you figure out? A lot of people look at your life and would want to emulate what you've done. Is that something that people can do? Look at someone like yourself and see your path. I mean, you're in real estate law, then investing. What do you even consider yourself? A businessman? How would you describe what you do?
Well, I don't consider myself I think my way of thinking will work for anybody, of trying to be very rational and disciplined. So I think that much. But to flit around to various careers and go into the other fellow's professional territory and try and outdo him and do all kinds of things like that, I think will not work for most people. And so I always I'm always being visited by young men who say, I'm practicing law and I don't like it, and I'd rather be a billionaire. How can I do it? And I tell them, well, I'll tell you a story. A young man goes to see Mozart. And he says, Mozart, I want to start composing symphonies. And Mozart said, how old are you? And the guy says, 22. And he says, you're too young to do symphonies. And the guy says, yes, but you were 10 years old when you were composing symphonies. And Mozart says, yes, but I wasn't running around asking other people how to do it.
Right.
So I think this flitting around business is something not everybody should try.
Yeah, I think
I think if I tried it again, it might not have worked as well.
you said just figure out
I
how
may
to
have
do
been
something
quite
and do
lucky.
it. Why were you were lucky?
Yeah, I think I had some luck, yes.
Well, but I think there's more to it than that. I mean, where were you looking?
Yes, the combination of luck and skill. That's what all good records are.
Right. So let me just ask you a few more questions. And do you eat all that peanut brittle up there, right?
Yeah.
Is that your one peanut brittle day, or do you eat
Yeah, it
peanut
is.
brittle? Really?
Yeah, it is.
So the other 364 days you don't eat much of it.
They put it there. I think Warren is so businesslike. He likes promoting peanut brittle at the annual meeting.
Well, don't the other Berkshire brands get jealous and say, why don't you put like a railroad train up there or something like that?
We got a whole exhibit hall full of other brands promoting one another at the Berkshire meeting. You cannot claim that we're under promoting.
I would never claim that. But you know, the Coke people and the See's people get special placement up there. don't
Yes, they do, but those are two. See's was our first great brand, and Coke is one of the great. Well, it's a great soft drink brand of the world. So they're entitled to have a a special place.
Do other companies ask to get put up there, though?
Well, they all push themselves forward as much as we'll let them.
Is that a yes?
Yes, of course they want to be pushed up.
And finally, Charlie, I want to ask you a little bit about philanthropy. And, you know, it seems like Warren's been sort of a little bit more upfront about that with Bill Gates and the Giving Pledge. And I know you're philanthropic as well. What is your thinking on that? How upfront?
Well, I wouldn't sign the Giving Pledge because I've already transferred so much to my children that I've already violated it. So I think I'm seeking false credit if I join them and say I'm a big philanthropist that's going to give more than half of my wealth to charity. I've already given more than half of it to my children. So I can't join them. It's like coming back from the dead. I can't do it.
But doesn't that make Warren mad? I mean,
No,
come on,
he
Charlie,
doesn't.
just
He's
shut
not mad. When is Warren mad about somebody else's? Warren thinks that each Berkshire Hathaway is entitled to do with his own money what he damn pleases.
So let me just follow up on that, what you did then. What was your thinking in terms of giving away money like that, though?
Well, it's simple as itself. I had a wonderful wife. Most wives worry that the husband, if he survives, will get involved with some nurse or something in his dotage, and that the money will go away from the children. And I knew that my dead wife would have preferred to have the money go to the children, so I arranged that she got her wish.
Right. So any thoughts on how the meeting is going to be different next year? I mean, when do you start talking about that, or do you even talk about the annual meeting?
We never talk about it. We just do what works as long as it works, and when it stops working or it indicates it's going to stop working, we'll stop.
Did Apple say they want to have some exhibit in the convention center this year?
I had no discussion with them. I don't have any idea what they're doing.
And do you see a time when Ajit and Greg and Ted and Todd will come up there with you at some point?
I don't know how it will morph. I don't think that what worked in one era has to be duplicated in another. I don't think what we're doing would work for many people. I think it was an historical accident. We didn't do it on purpose. We just sort of drifted into it. When it worked, we fanned the flames. But we didn't create it with any forethought. And I think some later generation will have some different system. I think there's more wiseassery in our meeting than would be appropriate forever. And I'm the principal wise-ass.
Yeah, you are. Charlie Munger, Vice Chairman of Berkshire Hathaway.
Wise-ass.
Wise-ass.
Right.
Thanks very much for joining us. I'm Andy Serwer. You've been watching Influencers. We'll see you next time.
This was the 54th annual shareholder meeting for Berkshire Hathaway. And while shareholder meetings are known for being lightly attended, staid, and downright boring, this was anything but. More than 40,000 people attended here, including business leaders like Activision Blizzard CEO Bobby Kotick, Quicken Loans founder Dan Gilbert, and Spanx founder Sarah Blakely. And for the first time, Apple CEO Tim Cook was in attendance. Apple is now Berkshire's largest equity holding, and Berkshire is Apple's third largest shareholder. We caught up with Cook this weekend and asked him what he thought about it all.
I think it's incredible. I've never been to an annual meeting like this before. You know, I thought ours was lively, but there's 40,000+ people here. And I love the fact that Warren and Charlie take every question, and of course, through all of it, not just the wisdom that they exude, but you can feel the integrity and the humility coming out. And I think it's a great learning experience for me and for everybody in the audience, I'm sure.
Joining us now is Berkshire's chairman and CEO, Warren Buffett. And Warren, what's it mean to you to have gone through this weekend?
It's a lot of fun. I mean, you see who you're working for, and they see you, and you interact with them, and they come in sort of a Mardi Gras spirit. I would say in the last 10 years, was now maybe 40, well, from out of town, not 40,000, but a great many from around the world. I just never get a letter of complaint. I mean, I know that somebody misses planes or has a car rental that isn't available or a hotel room, but they just come in the spirit of enjoying it, and the people in Omaha welcome them that way. So people go around with smiles on their faces. I mean, we have 600 of our own people that come in from our various subsidiaries, and they really work for a couple of days, and I've never seen anything but smiles on their faces.
Well, unfortunately, we're not going to allow you to rest on your laurels this week because we have some major news that's breaking this morning. You see the markets already down by almost 500 points, the futures here for the Dow. What do you think about the potential for trade tariffs coming back on and what that might mean for the trade talks?
Well, I can't gauge how both sides will play the game, and they're always, some people negotiate different ways, if we actually have a trade war, it will be bad for the whole world, and could be very bad depending on the extent of the war. But there's times in negotiations when you talk tough. The one thing you can't do, though, is you can't shake your fist first and then shake your finger later on. I mean, that is not a technique that works well. So when you do push ahead, you don't know exactly what the outcome's going to be.
Well, you can't shake your fist first and then shake which finger later? What are you talking about?
Well, you're more advanced on this than I am, actually. But that's what you're worried about, is you get the other finger back, and you have to mean it after a while. Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything, obviously, when you do that. And you're gauging a response from someone else that also has their own calculus and has their own internal political considerations and so on. So it's a dangerous game. Doesn't mean it's a game that shouldn't be engaged in, but it's a dangerous game.
You negotiate a lot of deals too. Would this be your tactic?
Well, it isn't mine at all. But you know, we can talk about the Occidental deal later on, the illustrate. But I've had a consistent way of negotiating, and that has its advantages. Probably has its disadvantages too. But I just say what I'll do, and I don't do anything else. So people really know that's what I mean, and they can decide whether what I've said is acceptable or not. But they know that I don't go through a game. Now, there's lots of people in acquisitions that really like to play games, and they're used to it in their own business, and it's their way of doing it, and that's fine, but it doesn't work with me. And I don't want to, I can't afford to spend the time on it. I mean, you know, you don't know whether you're ever going to get there, and you spend weeks and months, and it's just, it would be a huge time waster if we did it.
You know, I don't know that this is bluster coming from President Trump, though. He's already put the tariffs on. And I don't know that I would take this lightly and think that we're not going to be seeing 25% tariffs on Friday.
You can't, but if you're playing the game, you have to sound that way. I mean, if with some people in negotiations, the best technique is to act half crazy. I mean, you know, with your kids, you can see how it works. You know, I mean, you're negotiating things with your children all the time. You know, I'm going to count to 3, and if you don't do this and that, you know, they know you're not going to shoot them in the end. So they've really got the edge, and that goes on all the time. And it's interesting, kind of, with the reputation of the industry. We bought a very large auto dealership operation a few years ago, and we did make more or less our kind of deal, winning the price, and probably 20 times since then, people come out and they say we want to do something, and they just we've never found one that we could do the same way. I mean, it's just part of their lives to negotiate, and it's part of my life not to negotiate. So
you mean to come in with a high offer and expect that you're going to negotiate?
Yeah, anything you say, and I understand that. I mean, that's the way a lot of things take place. But probably a majority of transactions, but it's nice to have a reputation for not doing it because it makes it a lot easier. You save a lot of time.
Well, let's talk about what it would mean if tariffs on Chinese goods rose to 25% from 10% on that $200 billion worth of goods at the end of the week. How significant is that? What would it mean for Berkshire's businesses?
Well, it would mean a lot to the world. It isn't just the countries involved, because they take the dollars they receive from us net and they buy goods in other places. I mean, their trade surplus is considerably less overall than their trade surplus with us. So everything intersects in the world, and it depends who gets retaliatory with us or with them, and it's easier to start it than it is to stop it, and the effects would be huge if conducted on a major scale over time. Just imagine, Becky, that our Constitution was set up differently, and that states could erect tariffs, and Michigan would put a tariff in on cars, and we would have one on corn, and that. The degree to which trade would contract in this country, the mislocated plants, the migration of workers, I mean, it would be, well, it sounds ridiculous to talk about it, because it is ridiculous, but you've got countries where you would have similar effects if you get country after country after country, because you can't just have it between two countries. It will spread. Now, the very fact that it's sort of a nuclear threat is what brings people to the table. So I mean, that's the way that many play the game. But you don't want to have too many nuclear threats out there, because someday somebody may feel they have to fulfill one.
Right. Obviously, that's why the global markets are under pressure.
Sure.
It's not just Chinese markets that are down. You saw the Korea Kospi was down by about 3%. Markets down just about everywhere at this point.
It affects everything.
So that's you're saying the market's reaction is the right one. It's not an overreaction.
It's rational, and then we'll see what happens next. But obviously, if you went to bed a week ago and you thought there was a 1% chance of a trade war, and then subsequent events makes you think there's a 10% chance, markets reflect that very quickly.
What would you put in terms of, I mean, you're an actuarial mind in terms of these things. What kind of odds would you put on it?
When you talk about two leaders of the two major economic powers in the world, that's not the sort of thing I can lay odds on. I mean, you were talking about two personalities who are very much used to getting their way in politics, and you're talking about how they will be perceived in their own country in terms of their behavior, and it gets very complicated. There's no way I know how to predict that.
Although you've written insurance contracts on weirder things than this,
yeah.
What would it take for you to ensure that there was a deal done at the end of this?
It would take a big premium. Yeah, this would not be the kind of thing I would look to insure, frankly.
Because it's so unknowable?
Yeah, and you'd have a hard time finding the risk precisely, because if they lasted for a month, and then so you get into the duration of how long it was, you'd have a lot of trouble writing the contract. But it is the sort of thing, not precisely identical, but it's that we do take on unusual risks. But this is a big one.
What will it mean for Berkshire businesses specifically? And I just think on Friday we spoke with Jim Weber, who's the head of Brooks Running. They've already relocated and moved a lot of their operations to Vietnam because of this concern. They've been in the process of doing that since these trade talks first kind of appeared.
Well, we've seen it in our rail carload, intermodal, the stuff that arrives on the West Coast. I mean, everybody stocks up ahead of time, and it distorts things just thinking about it. You can imagine the distortion if you get into it. And you really can't predict the speed or the degree of effect, because it spreads. You can't do something between the U.S. and China in a big way without it affecting all the major markets as they go around. you're starting a game that you don't know the ending of, but you know it isn't a good game.
You say
But like you say, it may be necessary to play another game to avoid that sort of thing. I mean, that's what mutually assured destruction was. I mean, you felt as long as you had mutually assured destruction, nobody would actually launch a missile. And this is can be a similar type game, a little bit of chicken in it.
You say that intermodal rail loadings were affected by it, meaning that you saw an increase in rail car loadings because months ago because people were trying to stock up.
People loaded up on inventory that they thought might. I mean, if you thought there was going to be a 25%, I mean, if I thought there was going to be a 25% tax on Coca-Cola next week, I would have my house filled with Coca-Cola. It would look very good. Sales would look terrific, and guys that transported to my house would be doing great and everything, and boom, it'd all end.
Well, that's a big concern. I mean, if we've been looking at this great economy and thinking things are wonderful, but it was really just pulling things forward, and then you get into a situation where it stops down, does that concern you just about
economic growth? Well, it pulls things forward, and I think actually in the GDP figures there was a big inventory adjustment, no, if you think the flow of something is going to either stop or get more expensive, and you need it, you're going to load up ahead of time.
Will this change your behavior in any way when it comes to purchasing securities or making deals?
No, we will buy the same stocks today we were buying last week. It's just I won't tell you their names.
But would you buy more if you get them down 500 points?
The cheaper they get, the more I buy.
But it doesn't mean that you don't think the markets could go down further.
No, I'm not buying them because I think they're going to go up the next day or the next week.
Yeah. So it's something you're watching very closely?
Yeah. Yeah, but we watch the prices of things we do more than current events. Mm-hmm. Because in the end, we aren't buying them because what's going to happen next month or next quarter. You know, we're really buying them because we think they'll be good businesses 10 years from now. If somebody came to us with a good business today, we'd buy it. And we'd buy it regardless of what's going on in the tariff situation. We might have, won't be the case, but we're more likely perhaps to get something when other people are fearful. And you see that in a big way instantly in a market, in the market for businesses. But it's still there with people's minds.
Welcome back, everybody. We are here and news is breaking. There's just an SEC filing that came out from Kraft Heinz. That's obviously a big Berkshire Hathaway holding. Kraft Heinz says that it will restate earnings for 2016 and 2017 due to misstatements in the original filings. It does not, however, believe that the misstatements are what they call quantitatively material to any individual reporting period. It says that the impact on adjusted earnings is expected to be less than 2% for each year. Kraft Heinz says that it has now completed an investigation that shows several employees in its procurement operation engaged in misconduct, but none of those were members of senior management. Our guest today, again, is Warren Buffett. He's the chairman of Berkshire Hathaway, which owns a major portion of Kraft Heinz. And Warren, what do you think of this news just hitting while we're sitting here?
Well, that's more or less what I've heard. I'm not on the board anymore, but Greg Abel and Tracy Britt-Kuhl are on, and so I've heard from them. This is an update that I heard last night and they can't issue the first quarter reports until the 10K is filed, and they can't file the 10K till Price Waterhouse signs off on it, and that apparently is going to require a restatement of a few years, and we could not report any earnings from Kraft Heinz in the first quarter because if we get a dividend from Bank of America, that dividend goes into earnings. But because we have over 20% of Kraft Heinz, we don't report the dividends. We report the earnings. So we received a dividend of about $130 million in the first quarter, but that we don't report that. And we expected to get the earnings before we issued our own report, but when the time came to issue our report and we didn't have anything, we put a zero in there and explained it in our release last Saturday, and this is just a further indication of the facts as they stand now. At some point, Price Waterhouse will need to be happy with the figures they're reporting, and that evidently involves a restatement. And at that time, my guess is the quarterly figures become quite current, and that we keep picking up our share of the earnings.
I mean, this has been a long standoff period between PwC and the company. If they've missed all of the deadline to get the numbers to you at that point, what
Yeah,
happened?
we didn't expect it. And, I thought that we would have the earnings on time. And Kraft announced their earnings for last year, but they had not been signed off on by their auditors. So while they released them publicly, they couldn't file the 10K with the SEC subsequently. That's not unusual for companies to announce the earnings before they've actually got the sign off. But in any event, it's just, we thought we were going to get them this week or next week, whatever it might be. And then last Saturday came, and that's our time for releasing quarterly earnings. We did not have them, so we stuck nothing in there, and then had a footnote, and we put in our press release as well that we just didn't have the figures.
If they're restating their earnings, does that mean Berkshire Hathaway will also have to restate its earnings?
No, but it would be so immaterial by the time you take just our share, and we're a much larger company. So I don't know exactly what we do when we get, if it gets into the second quarter. I don't know whether we pick up 2 quarters in 1 quarter or exactly how that works.
They said that this is they've wrapped up this investigation. Are you satisfied with what you've heard from that part of the investigation, or do you know the details?
I don't know about that. I do know that because I've been kept abreast of some of the things. I don't listen in on directors' calls or anything like that. But Greg tells me what's the high points of what, or the low points of what's happened. And we have a terrific head of the audit committee, Jack Pope. He's an independent director. He knows this sort of thing, and he's put in the hours on it. And so I feel very good about the fact that Jack is he's really in charge of things from the standpoint of the directors.
Does the company have your confidence?
The company has my confidence.
You had talked about it over the weekend, where you said that what you paid for Kraft was too much in hindsight.
Exactly.
Not what you paid for Heinz.
That's correct. If we just bought Heinz, it'd be a better investment. And we don't 50 odd, just over 50% of it, of a business that we're doing fine in relation to what we paid for it.
In a situation where you've determined that you've now paid too much, what do you do?
I paid too much for stocks. I paid too much for a lot of things. Time usually works it out, but it means that capital could have been better deployed in other areas. You can always pay too much for a business, and I've done it with stocks many times. I've done it with businesses. We've got at Berkshire, we have at least a half a dozen businesses. And I can't even use a we there. I got to say, I paid too much. So, and if we make the next 10 deals we make, there will be a couple where it'll turn out that I paid too much.
Warren, there was other news that crossed the wires just last night in another deal that you're involved in. That would be backing up Occidental in its bid to try and take over Anadarko, which is also engaged in talks with Chevron, who's also got a bid out there. Last night, Occidental put out its own statement and said that it's going to be revising its proposal. It's now talking about a deal, still $76 a share offer, but 78% cash and 22% stock. By increasing that cash portion, it allows what they call significant immediate value, greater closing certainty, enhanced accretion, because with this, they no longer have to ask their shareholders for permission on this. What are your thoughts about where the deal stands and what this latest update says?
Yeah, I got a call yesterday evening. First time I'd talked to Occidental, actually since a week ago yesterday, Sunday. And they told me that they were going in this direction, which I like, but I have nothing to do with it. I mean, we committed $10 billion, and it had nothing to do with how they framed their offer, how much they offered, or anything else. That all they knew was that they were sure they could get $10 billion from us if they complete the deal with Anadarko.
One of the pieces of the letter that Vicki Hollub, the president and CEO of Occidental, put out in its letter back to Anadarko surprised me a little bit with just how it still seems like this is a hostile bid. There's not good faith talks that seem to be taking place between them. Based on her letter, she said this: "We remain perplexed at your apparent resistance to obtaining far more value for Anadarko shareholders, which has been expressed clearly through our interactions over the last week." Sounds to me like that is still kind of a hostile bid. What?
Well, it's my understanding, and bear in mind, the first thing I heard about this was a week ago Friday when Brian Moynihan called and said the people of Occidental like to talk to you, and I talked to them on Sunday, a week ago yesterday. My understanding is Anadarko and Occidental had talked much earlier, well before the Chevron bid, and we're talking about a transaction, and then Chevron made an offer which Anadarko accepted, but Anadarko was for sale. I mean, and so it had held talks about selling itself to Occidental. This is my understanding, so they were talking. Maybe they were talking to more than two parties, for that matter. I wouldn't know that, but they decided that they were willing to sell. I'm sure subject to price, obviously, and they accepted an offer, and Occidental felt they had a better offer, and that's apparently where things still stand, but I don't know all the details.
Part of the idea behind it had been that, well, would Occidental be able to get approval from its shareholders because its stock was under pressure? Some of the shareholders obviously didn't like the deal. By using your cash instead of issuing as much stock as they had anticipated originally, that will keep them from having to go to their shareholders to ask permission for this. And as they're saying in their own letter, that certainly increases the certainty of this deal taking place and removes some of that uncertainty.
Yeah. I would also think that the shareholders, if you own Occidental, you're bullish on oil over the years, and you're probably bullish on the Permian Basin because they have such a significant portion of their assets there. So the idea that they will use less stock and more cash as part of the deal, although they're getting the cash from us, but I would think net, if I'd been a holder of Occidental over time, I probably would like that kind of a deal. At Berkshire, I hate to issue stock. So generally speaking, if any company we own is buying something, we like it better when they buy it for cash than they use stock because we like their stock. So we'll see what the reaction is to this, but I would just imagine it had been an all-stock offer to begin with. I would think people would net their shareholders, but the shareholders will be speaking out. But I would think that the shareholders would like the shift.
Andrew's got a question from back in studio too. Andrew?
Sure.
Hey, Warren, I was just curious whether you were surprised that Anadarko hadn't engaged with Occidental on this at this price, and also if there was a price at which you would think that that Occidental shouldn't pay, meaning if Chevron were to come back and they're 5 times the size of Occidental, they could just write a check and this could be over with if they wanted to. But if the price were to go up, I know you get preferred shares ultimately. Is there a price at which you wouldn't look at this favorably?
Well, we've committed the $10 billion, 100%. But we do not have any control, nor did we want any control over what Occidental did with our $10 billion in the terms of everything. There's nothing in our deal that provides that they have to come back to us and request permission really to do anything. It's a remarkable deal, but that's the way we do them, and in that respect. And so they get our $10 billion if and when they close a deal with Anadarko, and they don't have to consult us. They certainly don't need our vote. They don't. It was a matter of courtesy. I got the call yesterday, but it was not a matter of necessity on their part. And that's one of the advantages of dealing with Berkshire. I mean, we can do things that other people don't like to do or their lawyers don't like them to do. And this is not a deal that our lawyers would have written.
Is this deal a bet on the Permian Basin and on oil prices, or is this just a bet on, hey, it's great to have an 8% preferred?
Well, that's great to have an 8% preferred if there isn't any oil there. No, it's a bet on oil prices over the long term more than anything else. It's also a bet on the fact that the Permian Basin is what it's cracked up to be and all of that sort of thing. But oil prices will determine whether almost any oil stock is a good investment over time, whether it's Exxon or some wildcat driller. I mean, if oil goes way down, you don't solve that by hardly anything. And if it goes way up, you make a lot of money. And it's not what it does next week or next month or next year. You're buying reserves that go far out into the future. So you have to have a view on oil over time. And Charlie and I have got some views on that, not too specific because they're not that well informed, but they are. We feel good about doing the financing.
Why don't you just buy it yourself? It's only a $35 billion deal, and you've got $110 billion in cash sitting around.
Well, that might have happened if Anadarko had come to us, but we wouldn't jump into some other deal that we just heard about through somebody coming to us and seeking financing. We wouldn't. No, we hope people come to us on businesses, but I had no idea that this transaction was going to happen. I mean, a week ago Friday when I got the call from Brian Moynihan, well, I'd read in the paper about the deal, but I've never had any contact with Anadarko of any sort.
David Faber reported last week that you had said you would offer up to $20 billion, double the $10 billion that you did do on this deal. Is that the case?
If they needed it. But I think they have an arrangement, obviously, with the Bank of America, who called us. I don't know anything about that deal. I just know that the B of A has arranged that debt financing. If there were a different sort of thing. But what I meant to some extent with that is I'd be also very happy if somebody calls tomorrow and needs $20 billion. Occidental just needed the $10 billion.
Okay, but you like doing these deals at bigger sizes, not smaller sizes?
Exactly.
Okay. Back to Andrew's point, this is there for forever. It doesn't matter if the bids go up. Doesn't matter what happens along the way. Your $10 billion is in this deal for whatever happens.
Yeah, there is. The lawyers don't write deals like this, but we tell them to. There's no material adverse change. There's no. If the stock market closes, but this deal closes, we're there. We're there under all circumstances, and we have not written any outs into it, and but that's part of the attraction of doing business with Berkshire. And besides that, we do it all ourselves, so it isn't something that's parceled out among 10 parties, and each one comes in and has to get their permission to make changes and all that. When they came to my office at 10 o'clock on Sunday, week ago Sunday, yeah. They knew that if we agreed, which we did by 11 o'clock, they knew Berkshire was 100% in. Now, they had their own board of directors meeting the following evening, but they could say to their board, you're going to get $10 billion from Berkshire when this closes, and you don't need to give a thought to it.
Obviously, many stocks are under some pressure from what they were seeing from these Chinese trade talks, what the implications are from all of that. One stock that is under pressure today, shares of Apple. If you want to take a look at the chart, closed on Friday at $211.75. This morning, the bid's at $204.91. The ask is at $205.10, and that's because China has been such a huge component for Apple. Tim Cook talked in the last earnings last week about how things seem to be be really improving there. Tim Cook also traveled to Omaha this weekend. He was here for the Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting. It's his first time coming here, but for Berkshire, Apple is now the biggest investment that they have in their equity portfolio. It's also Berkshire is also the third largest investor in shares of Apple. So when we sat down with Tim Cook this weekend, I got the chance to ask him what he thought and how he found out that Berkshire was first buying into shares of Apple. Listen in.
I found out probably like you did, which is the 13F gets filed and somebody tells me about it, and I thought, oh, this is really cool. Warren Buffett is investing in Apple. You know, we welcome all shareholders, but we run the company for the long term. And so the fact that we've got the ultimate long-term investor in the stock is incredible because our interests are aligned. And then I knew Warren before then, but we had no idea they were looking at the company. They do all that obviously secretly and have their own method of doing that. And it's been a privilege, and I'm super happy they've been accumulating.
What happened when you found out? Was there talk around the office? Were there any high fives, or was it a, oh boy, now what?
It seemed like recognition in a way, like an honor. And a privilege, and I don't mean that in a light-hearted kind of way. I mean, wow, it's Warren Buffett is investing in the company, and yeah, and so it felt great. And I think for the whole company, because we knew that he didn't. He's been very clear he didn't invest in technology companies and companies he didn't understand. He's been totally clear with that, and so he obviously views Apple as a consumer company. Yeah. And in a different kind of way. I think that's really special.
Warren, what did you think hearing this? Because when I told you we were going to tell you how he found out, you said, "Oh, good. I'd like to hear the story." You've never talked to him about that?
I didn't. Not about that specifically. No. I've known Tim a little over the years. I see him maybe at least once a year, and maybe twice a year. And I've talked to him on the phone a few times. And sent him a letter. I sent him a Martin Luther King speech some years ago that was kind of lost to history. That was terrific, and I thought he'd enjoy. But no, I didn't call him up while we were buying. I try to keep as quiet as I can when we're buying anything.
China, though, is a huge issue for Apple. It's why the stock had been under pressure earlier this year, or at the end of last year. Last week on the earnings call, it certainly sounded like they thought China, the situation there was improving. What does this news today mean for you?
Well, the important thing is really what the relationship is with China 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now. This all enters in, and certainly it's hard for me to imagine that the two most important countries in the world would do dumb things over a long period of time, but they could. I mean, the possibility always exists that you get miscalculations or egos or national pride or whatever it may be, and that things do escalate. I don't think that'll happen. I know it shouldn't happen. I think it's a low probability, but that would be bad. It'd be bad for everything Berkshire owns. It isn't a question of Apple or. It have a very negative effect